Labą rytą, good morning, distinguished ambassadors, dear guests. We're just talking with the ambassador of United Kingdom, probably all ambassadors, and Ambassador Israel agreed to convince during this conference United Kingdom stay in Europe. Let me turn to Lithuanian language. Gerbiami svečiai, Jūsų Ekscelencijos ambasadoriai, Seimo nariai, diskusijos pranešėjai.
Your Excellencies, ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the discussion co-organized by the Seimas Committee on European Affairs, the Seimas Committee on Foreign Affairs, and the European Information Office of the Seimas. It is also organized in cooperation with the European Commission's representation and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The discussion of today is titled Brexit, what it means for Lithuania and the European Union. It is a pleasure for me to introduce to you the keynote speakers of today's discussion. My colleague, Mr. Juozas Bernatonis, Chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, will deliver his welcome address to overview the implications for the EU and Lithuania. We will listen to the speeches by Mr. Arnoldas Pranckevičius, Head of the European Commission representation in Lithuania, Ms. Jovita Neliupšienė, Permanent Representative of Lithuania to the EU, and Mr. Albinas Zananavičius, Vice President of Foreign Affairs. They will also overview the implications for the EU and Lithuania, as well as for the Lithuanian national living in the UK. We will also listen to the key observations by Ms. Claire Lawrence, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to the Republic of Lithuania. She will overview her insights unless we persuade her of not attempting to leave the EU. We will then move on to discussing Lithuania's interests in the Brexit negotiations, and we will listen to the remarks by business representatives. My colleague, Mr. Juozas Bernatonis, Chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, will contribute to the opening of today's discussion. However, on my behalf, I would like to say that Brexit is one of the current challenges. There have been rumors that Brexit will cause a domino effect. However, the recent Dutch election have demonstrated that the EU manages to stay united. This does not mean, however, that we can relax. By the way, another good news, I believe that our closer cohesion demonstrates that the EU remains an attractive project. This is demonstrated by the good news that have just come from Switzerland. We are interested in maintaining our cooperation with the UK and perhaps even deepen the cooperation. UK, as we know, is one of the biggest trading partners of ours. Our bilateral trade significantly contributes to the growth of our GDP. I would also like to note that the UK has a lot of experience in our cooperation in defense. We have jointly engaged in joint operations in Afghanistan and elsewhere. Therefore, I believe that UK's engagement in the EU security affairs will continue to remain of vital importance. What is also important is that as Theresa May presented Brexit priorities to the European Commission and the EU, she expressed her willingness to have further good relations between the UK and the EU. However, we're still concerned about the financial aspects. As you know, we have the power plant decommissioning issues pending. The funding of these projects has already been negotiated to be done on the EU funds. However, since we are talking about final decommissioning, the sums that have been pledged for us cannot be deemed as final. We do hope that the UK will fully implement its financial commitments to the EU. Of course, the major issue of Brexit for us is the rights of our nationals living in the UK, which can total at 170,000. Our citizens must not become objects of negotiations. For Lithuanian as well as other EU nationals have worked a lot and are now rooted in the country, and they have definitely contributed to the economic growth of UK. Colleagues, today we have an opportunity to look deeper into the issues and express our views and opinions, exchange our ideas regarding the future of the EU following Brexit. I'm really hopeful that this story can have a happy ending, maybe not the one like in those Hollywood movies, but perhaps we will find ways how to better speak with nations, with national parliaments and the people. In the context of the discussion, I would like to note that for Lithuania, preserving the project of the EU is of vital importance. For a person who has been engaged in the EU negotiation processes, I remember very well our path towards EU membership, and this project for us is crucially important. However, preserving this project will require our joint efforts in ensuring social stability and creating jobs. And following the 2008 financial crisis, Lithuania was one of the few countries which found it difficult to leave the crisis, and perhaps Brexit implications will also be very important for our further economic development. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency ambassadors, I would now like to give the floor to my colleague, Mr. Juozas Bernatonis, who will continue chairing this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency ambassadors, guests, ladies and gentlemen. Today, the Brexit matter, which is at the focus of our attention, has dominated in all the European institutions, the European Parliament, the agenda of the European Council. It is widely discussed in all member states of the EU. I myself visited London last year, and it was a symbolic coincidence that we were there on the very first day of the UK's official notification about its withdrawal from the EU there. It was very interesting to hear the position of the UK. It is obvious that the process will be long and complicated issues will have to be resolved in the process. Therefore, today we are having a very important discussion here today, during which we are going to discuss various aspects, the outcomes of Brexit, its impact on Lithuania, economic relations and their strengthening, cooperation in security and defense field, and other matters. It is very important to discuss these issues in order to bring some clarity to the situation, inform our public, European public. And it is also very important to speak about the significant contribution of the UK to strengthening of security in the European Union and maintaining the strategic line in the future. I would like to have a wider outlook and predict how Europe might look like after Brexit, the relations between the UK and the EU, how will security architecture of Europe and the whole world will look like, and what place Lithuania will take in this architecture. During the negotiations, as well as in the process of concluding a new agreement, various political, economic, and security issues will have to be discussed, and very much will depend upon the outcome of these negotiations. Outcomes to global economy, the world trade, among other things. And one of the existing scenarios or models, European economic area, the Swiss model, the Canadian model or scenario, will be difficult to apply, to be imposed here. Economic, financial, foreign security policy will have to be widely discussed, and the agreement will have to set new rules for the cooperation in a very wide area. The European Union needs the UK, whereas the UK needs the European Union. Therefore, close cooperation is essential here, trying to ensure strong Europe in the future. Therefore, I believe that the close partnership formula will be the one that relations between the UK and EU, as well as between the UK and Lithuania, will take. Lithuania is very much interested to maintain strong economic relations in the future as a strategic partner, to cooperate in the field of defense and security. I myself am a strong supporter of such cooperation because we have very similar attitudes towards very many security and foreign policy aspects in general. And we could further elaborate the idea of involving the UK more into the NB8 cooperation mechanism. This is the matter I often discuss with our partners from the Nordic countries as well as the UK. I am confident that already today it is necessary to think not only about the near future prospects, but about the long-term relations as well. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I would like to give the floor to the first speaker of our today's conference, the head of the European Commission representation in Lithuania, Mr. Arnoldas Pratskevičius. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bernatonis, Mr. Kirkilas. Thank you for the invitation. Members of the Seimas, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. We meet at an historical moment in time, and if you would ask me if this is the first time in history, this wouldn't probably be the first such case. The British scientists have recently proved that 450,000 years ago, the British Isles first separated from the European continent. Today is the second historical moment in history when the British people decided democratically in their democratically held elections to leave the EU following a number of years living together with the rest of Europe. This once again proves that the EU is a union of free will, as well as a union of trust and respect for one another. And so we respect the will expressed by the British people. Whether or not we agree with that, whether or not we're happy about that. On the 29th of March, Prime Minister Theresa May activated Article 50 of the Treaty on the European Union, and our further efforts will be looking to a rather complicated period of time. Most important thing is to achieve a final agreement so that both sides are happy with the outcome. What is also important is that during the negotiation we have to make sure that there is no uncertainty left, and so that the citizens' rights would be first and foremost ensured in the process of negotiations, as Theresa May has expressed in her letter to Donald Tusk. And as Mr. Juncker has also mentioned in his letter, in that citizens first. So these rights will be of primary importance in the negotiation process, so that they're not discriminated against, so that social rights are preserved, rights to pensions, rights to education, and so that they are not not an object of negotiations. Of course, financial commitments will also be of key importance in the process of negotiation. As with every family member has mutual commitments which have to be fulfilled to the full. So it has to be noted that by the end of the time when the UK leaves the EU, the UK remains a fully committed EU partner, and so we hope that the UK will stay committed, especially with regards to its financial commitments, and ensures the continuity of the currently undertaken projects. Unity will also be at stake. The EU member states have already agreed that their interests would be represented by Michel Barnier, who has already started meeting with the heads of state and government. Michel Barnier is already aware of the interests of all the EU member states and will make every effort to effectively represent all of them and ensure that the negotiation process is conducted in a proper way, that the negotiation is led on proper legal terms rather than on emotional ones, and that we will continue further cooperating in the areas such as defense, science and culture, where the UK takes a global lead, as well as many other areas where we will continue to remain strategic partners. So the calendar for further actions has already been launched. We're looking forward now to the upcoming meeting of the Council, during which Michel Barnier will be given the mandate to negotiate the interests of both sides. We are looking forward to the 18 months of We're looking forward to the 18 months of a lengthy period of negotiations. Following the 18 months, at the end of October 2018, we are expecting to see the end of the negotiation process, so that we would have enough time for the ratification of the agreement in the key EU institutions, and most importantly in the Council of the European Union, where qualified majority will be needed on the vote, as well well as giving enough time for the parliamentary votes. So this will be the time needed for the agreement between the EU and UK to take full effect. As for the future relations, I believe it is still too early to talk about, since we must first and foremost come to terms with the terms for negotiation. The UK, the European institutions, and the team by Michel Barnier will be parties to the negotiation and will be trying to find ways how to meet the expectations of all of the sides. And they will first and foremost rely on the key European principles, including the principles of free movement. Dialogue with citizens as well as with national parliaments will also be of crucial importance in the process. That is why I welcome the launch of the discussion on Brexit, including the rights of our citizens. And this also contributes to ensuring transparency in the entire negotiation process. And finally, what is most important is unity. The unity of all the EU member states in order to ensure that there is clarity and consensus, as well as unity following the outcome of the Brexit, since our common challenges are too global to work in isolation, especially when it comes to terrorism, to climate change, to Russia's aggression, or the Syrian conflict, which just this morning reminded us the scope of this huge global challenge. So in this respect, the common leadership by the EU and the UK will be very important in the future. We should also recall the news by Benjamin Franklin, the first US ambassador in Paris, who said, either we stay united or we are hanged separately. So let's stay united, let's stay together. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your interesting insights. And now I would like to give the floor to Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Lithuania, Mr. Albinas Zananavičius. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, after such a dramatic ending of Mr. Arnoldas' speech, I believe it is high time we speak about the impact that Brexit might have on Europe and on Lithuania. And this is the goal of our session, as a matter of fact. Well, speaking about the impact, it's probably too early today. Let's say in 2 years, in 1.5 years, we will have a much better understanding and picture of how the process is going. It goes without saying, as my colleagues mentioned, there are 3 main blocks of matters in these negotiations. And first is, of course, related to the citizens. And I believe that clarity here will come sooner, when we will be able to say to our diaspora as well as the citizens of the UK residing in other European Union countries that you are safe. Another point is how Brexit will impact the European Union in general. And it is very important that the process, particularly the financial matters, will not bring big damage to Europe. And it is quite understandable that making new deals takes time. Therefore, I look very much forward to understanding of both sides during the negotiation process. And the third big block of issues is related to our trade and economic relations. And I'm not mentioning specific deals here. And we'll have to establish new rules, new mechanisms, and probably even to make a precedent in the world. It will be a very huge task, a very complicated assignment, but the short-term impact, as well as our future, will very much depend on it, because it will show how close with the UK will manage to remain. In Lithuania, we are clearly showing the interest of maintaining close relations with the UK, and the presence of the UK ambassador here today shows that our ties are really quite close, and it is our interest to maintain it like this. I would like to mention some short-term impact that we are observing already today, and primarily it is as follows, because Brexit served as an alarm clock for all of us when one day we came to realize that the stability, the peace that we are enjoying is not eternal, and we need to make every effort to maintain it. We need to work hard. This is the first observation. Another observation that we can feel in the internal discussions going on in the EU is that we are becoming more united, unanimous, and realize more and more that we need to maintain our continent and care about its security, among other things. Lithuania has clearly identified that it wants to be in the center of Europe, within the nucleus of Europe, in other words. And now I believe that my colleague, Ambassador Jovita Neliupšienė, will tell you more about the process itself. Thank you, Vice Minister. It is actually my duty to present our ambassador, to introduce our ambassador who has come from Brussels to this discussion today. And I'm really glad to give the floor to Jovita Neliupšienė.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, Europeans, as I should probably put it, following such opening remarks, it would probably be very difficult to add anything new. Nevertheless, every discussion must have at least one person to provoke you. Or perhaps this is not the job of us as diplomats, but let me try and make this discussion more lively and bring some realism into it. Yes, we do sense the outcome of Brexit already, which is the unity of the EU and its attempt to look into its further actions. For example, in Bratislava, the leaders of our countries have already demonstrated with their agenda that they will try to complete some of the undertaken actions. So this is one of the few examples of the unity that we have recently witnessed. Another outcome was the future vision of the EU. This began in Malta when the discussions of the future of the EU and its future scenarios have been launched. The discussion on the EU's 5 scenarios is an ongoing one, and it's also a very rare occasion that the European leaders meet to discuss the future scenarios of the EU and reflect the expectations of the European citizens. This is something that was lacking before. However, let's be realistic and admit that we are facing Brexit, a process which will be neither pleasant nor nice, nor friendly, because we are talking about divorce. Even if we take human relations, however banal this might sound, even in civilized couples, the divorce process is a very complicated one, because financial matters must be settled, as well as the custody of children, and nothing comes for free. As one high-ranking official has said, if you order 3 beers, you have to pay for 3 beers, rather than leave without paying for some of them. So let's be fair and honest and admit that there will be one side which will be having its own interests into perspective, and so we will have to define our own national perspectives first and foremost, the interests of our country, and so there will be one discussion taking place in the framework of the 27 EU member states, while the other one will be taking place engaging the UK, I'm sorry. So we will have to think as to whether we'll have to prioritize our national interests or our relations with the UK. Of course, this does not mean that we cannot strike a balance to ensure a win-win situation. After all, that was why the EU was originally created, which is to seek compromise. However, whenever we have two sides, we have to have the negotiation of interests in mind. Since 2015, since 2005 till 2015, our growth, our GDP growth has doubled. 66% of our trade has also, the growth by 66% of our trade is also related to our EU membership, and our trade with the UK accounts for the largest share of our trading turnover. We can also recall those times when the EU funds accounted for 80% of all the investments in our country. Now we have grown as an economy, and at the moment we receive about 54% of investments from the EU, whereas the UK is in the 12th position according to direct investments into our country. So preserving trade relations is a priority for us. We want to make sure that there are no additional restrictions imposed following the Brexit to ensure free movement of goods and people. And as always, it is very important to define not only the very substantial, tangible values, such as financial aspects. We also have to put into perspective the rights of our citizens, as it has already been mentioned today. Citizens living in the UK as well as in Ireland, which will also be affected by Brexit, perhaps even more than us. We have a lot of Lithuanian nationals living there as well. However, I believe that it is in the best interest of the UK and Ireland to ensure the rights of our nationals living there. By the way, the UK universities are very popular among our nationals. However, if we think about the Erasmus program, in this program, the UK's universities, however, are not as popular as others. We will also be looking forward to two processes in the future. One of them will be the usual process of negotiations taking place behind closed doors, and there will also be another process that will be visible in the public space. And we won't be able to avoid all the drama because we will be sitting at the same table with the UK, and there will always be cases when one side will not know what the other one is doing. And this will be manifested in the news and the media as well. Well, I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but perhaps having this into perspective and having in mind the interests and our values in mind as well, we cannot forget that at the end of the day, we are discussing with a partner. This is not an enemy, it is our friend. And if coming back to the parallel with human relations, you always know how to come to terms with your friend, how to address the matter, and how to agree with him. So we have to make use of all the measures available, and we must remember the good times as well that we had. Thank you.
Now I would like to give the floor to Ambassador of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Mrs. Claire Lawrence.
Thank you very much for that. It's very nice to be here on a panel with people who have said that an awful lot that I can agree with, actually. To start from your last statement, I very much hope that we will be able to approach the process going forwards as friends, not just the exit from the EU, but of course our relationship with Lithuania after that. I wanted to say just a few things. Many will be repeating what has already been said this morning, which, as I say, I very much welcome. The first is to really emphasize what my Prime Minister repeated perhaps 5 times in her letter to Donald Tusk, and that is that we would like a deep and special partnership with the EU. For us, I think that's 2 key areas. Those are the 2 areas perhaps that people have talked about a lot already this morning. Firstly, prosperity, trade, investment, economic relations, and secondly, security, whether that's working together on organised crime, or I know sort of particularly importantly for this part of the world, working the UK and EU together on foreign policy, defence policy, and those sorts of issues. The second thing that I want to emphasise, but again I'm very pleased to have heard it so much this morning, is that we want to approach this in a really constructive manner. And I hope that we will be able to go into the negotiations. You've heard the timings projected for those in a way that will take us forward smoothly. No doubt there will be 1 or 2 moments where things get more heated, but we really hope that we can get through those. Of course, early on in the negotiations, we would like to tackle the issue of EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU. I know how important that is here in Lithuania, not just from reading your press, but because I would imagine a very large proportion of my Lithuanian friends have family in the UK, and actually quite a large proportion of my family has Lithuanian friends in the UK. So even at a sort of personal level, I know how much that means, and I can really want to reassure people that that will be something we hope to be able to reach an agreement on early. As you heard, there are perhaps 2 issues for us to look at as we go forwards. One is, of course, how we negotiate our withdrawal from the EU. I hesitate to say divorce, because hopefully it'll be not quite a parallel to that, but our withdrawal. And then secondly, at the same time, how we negotiate what our future relationship with the EU will be. I think we would like to make sure that once we have left, there is an element of certainty. That's not just certainty for us in the UK, but certainty for our partners and friends across Europe as well, whether that's certainty for citizens or certainty for businesses. Having that in place as early as possible, I think, will be important for everybody. I would also say that, as many people have already mentioned, it is important for the EU to continue to be a strong and robust organisation. And my Prime Minister was very clear, as she has been now a couple of times, including when she has visited the United States, that we want the EU to succeed and prosper. While we have decided democratically that the EU is not quite the right organisation for us to be in, that is an entirely different thing, of course, to the EU going forwards in a successful manner, and that is something we definitely want to see. We continue to have the same common values as the EU, for example. I saw that with the protests across Russia recently, where many of us were issuing very, very similar statements, and I cannot see that attachment to those values, to European security, in any way changing. And then maybe my final point to pull out, which again I'm very pleased that it's already been made for me a little bit, is the importance of not only our relationship between the UK and the EU going forwards, but of course the relationship between the UK and Lithuania. And as I left my embassy this morning, I almost had to physically climb over bits and pieces of building material because we're yet again slightly expanding. We're slightly expanding not only because of BREXIT, but actually because there is an awful lot of substance which many speakers have already touched on in the UK-Lithuania relationship, and I see no reason why that should change. In fact, we're working actively on how that can deepen and become even more concrete in the years going ahead. So I hope that the UK's relationship with the EU and with Lithuania in many ways will not have fundamentally altered in terms of the values, the focus on security, the focus on prosperity that we share going forwards, and that we'll be able to reach that point smoothly over the next 2 years. Thank you.
Dėkuoju ambasadoriai, kaip matot.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. As we can see, the discussion that we have planned in our first part is coming to an end. We are running out of time, but I still believe that we could have a few short questions, if you have any, to have a full-fledged discussion, and then we will have the second part of our event. Is there anyone willing to ask our speakers now or later?
Prašom trumpai.
Tai ačiū visiems, kurie čia kalbėjo.
I would like to thank all the keynote speakers. However, I still fail to find an answer to one of my own questions. Perhaps somebody here will be able to answer it. So who will ultimately determine the guidelines for negotiations? And who will have a final say on the Brexit negotiations? If we listen to what the European Parliament is saying, the European Parliament is saying that they will have the final say. If we listen to what the representative of the Council of the European Union is saying, they say that the Council will determine the final decision. And where are the national parliaments in this process? What role are they going to take? What effect will they have on the heads of state and their decisions they're going to take in the Council of the European Union? We listen to what all the leaders are saying, to what Barnier are saying. The latter's approach is a bit more balanced, I have to say, but nevertheless, what is the role of the national governments and national parliaments? I would like to briefly note that our legal acts, as well as the statute of the Seimas, indicate our Seimas committees will debate on the mandate to be given to our leadership. However, to better answer this question, I believe our ambassador is more suited to answer this question. Well, as Mr. Chairman has already mentioned, we have an established order for determining the mandates and the positions for our ministers, which they will ultimately take to the Council of the European Union, and I believe the process will not be changed. But perhaps we should have started in greater detail from the process in itself. At the end of this April, the heads of state will agree on the negotiating guidelines. They will be agreed by consensus, and this will be done with the agreement with Sherpa. Later on, the process will be taken on by the European Commission, and the European Commission will present its proposal on the negotiating mandate or negotiating directives. There is a current tendency within the guidelines to agree on certain mandates with respect to certain areas, such as citizens' rights, financial aspects, border protection, or some other technical aspects. So the negotiating mandates will be elaborated by ambassadors or in the framework of a certain task force appointed by the Council. And they will be working, as Arnoldas has mentioned, for the next 18 months. They will be working on a weekly or monthly basis, reporting to the ambassadors and coordinating the process. Following the 18-month period, they will come back to the Council to agree on the final decision. Their consensus is required. So at this point it's difficult to expect the final result, but at the moment we're talking about the launch of the Article 50. And so the final decision will be taken in the European Council. It will then be taken for ratification in the European Parliament, as well as the national British Parliament. This decision is titled consent, and it requires...
Dėkuoju ambasadoriai. Norėčiau nuoširdžiai padėkoti visiems pirmosios mūsų diskusijos dalies pranešėjams už išsakytas mintis, įžvalgas. Aš manau, kad tai padės mums apsibriežti ateities veiksmų gairės, ieškant atsakymą į tuos sudėtingus, aktualius ir kompleksiškus klausimus. Dabar pagal mūsų diskusijos darbotvarkę perėsim prie antrosios dalies, įvyks pranešėjų pasikeitimas scenoje ir mes diskutuosime apie Lietuvos interesus BREXIT derybose. Tai, mėly kolegos, gerbiami svečiai, tęsia mūsų diskusiją. Lietuvos bendruomenės Jungtinėje karalystėje lūkesčiai. Dabar noriu suteikti žodį Užsienio reikalų ministerijos užsienio lietuvių departamento direktoriui Vytautui Pinkui. Prašom, ambasadoriau.
Labadiena, gerbiamas pirmininkė, Jūsų ekscelencijos ambasadoriai, gerbiami Seimo nariai, ponios ir ponai. Dėkui už tą galimybę pristatyti poziciją Jungtinėje karalystėje gyvenančių lietuvių, kurių skaičius yra įspūdingas, gal minėti konkrečius skaičius yra sudėtinga, tačiau bet kokiu atveju yra tai daugiau negu ketvirtis visų užsienyje gyvenančių lietuvių ir tai natūralu, kad Lietuvos vienas iš svarbiausių interesų, pagrindinis prioritetas yra būtent tų žmonių likimas po BREXIT. Tai, kad piliečių teisų užtikrinimas buvo kaip pagrindinis prioritetas paminėtas ne tik kiekvieno turbūt iš pirmoje dalyje kalbėjusių dalyvių, bet yra įvardinta ir ES ir Jungtinės karalystės tiek vadovų, tiek dėrybininkų suteikia rimtą pagrindą tikėtis, kad šis klausimas dėrybose bus išspręstas sėkmingai ir greitai užtikrinant lygiavertes tiek ES piliečių gyvenimo sąlygas Jungtinėje karalystėje, tiek Jungtinės karalystės piliečių sąlygas, gyvenimo sąlygas Europos Sąjungoje. Tačiau kol dėrybos nebaigtos, iš tikrųjų kol jos neprasidėjo, tai nėra iš tikrųjų žinomi atsakymai, kokia bus konkreti teisinė aplinka. Ir ta nežinomybė, ateities neapibrėžtumas tikrai veikia lietuvių bendruomenės gyvenimą Jungtinėje karalystėje, jų emocijas ir lūkesčius. Netikrumo jausmas sustiprino BREXIT turbūt diskusijų metu prieš referendumą vyravę argumentai nukreipti prieš migraciją, izoliavimąsi, nuotaikas tarp BREXIT šalininkų. Na ir natūralu, kad Jungtinė karalystėje veikiančios lietuvių organizacijos ir bendruomenės, jos tikrai labai aktyviai įsitraukė į diskusijas apie besikeičiančią situaciją ir galimas pasekmes. Buvo surinkti keli seminarai, jau turbūt susitikimai, diskusijos tiek Vilniuje, Briuselyje, Londone. Londone Sičio lietuvių klubas atliko gana išsame apklausą tarp Lietuvos piliečių gyvenančių Jungtinėje karalystėje ir šios apklausos rezultatai ir analizė bus pristatyti vėliau šį mėnesį vyksinčioje Seimo ir pasaulio lietuvių bendruomenės komisijos susitikime. Aš gal pasisakysiu apie pagrindinius keliamus klausimus ir kelias vyraujančias temas. Tai yra, žinoma, lūkesčiai dėl gyvenimo Jungtinėje karalystėje po BREXIT, svarstymai apie grįžimą į Lietuvą, ryšio su Lietuvos valstybė išlaikymas, tai yra diskusija apie dvigubą pilietybę. Na ir bendruomeniškumas, lietuviškų organizacijų veikla, išlaikant lietuvių tapatybę gyvenant užsienyje. Dauguma jau dabar gyvenančių Didžiojoje Britanijoje ir turinčių legalias pajamas lietuvių ir toliau tikisi po BREXIT'o likti, tęsti savo gyvenimą toje šalyje. Tai parodo ir jau dabar išaugęs skaičius žmonių, kurie kreipiasi dėl rezidento statuso, nors jis nėra privalomas ES piliečiams. Kiti, žinoma, tikisi, kad bus pasiektas susitarimas dėl kažkokio tai specialaus ES piliečių statuso arba bent jau bus palengvinta ar sukurta speciali kažkokia procedūra gauti leidimui nuolat gyventi arba rezidento statuso. Dažniausiai nuogąstavimai dėl ateities susijęs su galimų socialinių garantijų praradimu, laisvo judėjimo apribojimu. Kartu nemažai lietuvių nerimauja, kaip ir visi Jungtinės karalystės kad jiems, kaip ir visiems Jungtinės karalystės gyventojams, gyvenimo kokybė pablogės dėl ekonominių Brexit pasiekmių, tokių kaip nutrūksančių prekybinių ryšių, svaro kurso kritimo, iškelimų darbo vietų ir panašiai. Jeigu ženkliai pablogėtų gyvenimo ir darbo sąlygos, dalis Jungtinės karalystės lietuvių rinktųsi gyvenimą kitose ES arba Europos ekonominės erdvės šalyse. Tiesą sakant, tik pakankamai nedaug svarsto galimybę grįžti į Lietuvą. Na ir pagrindinės nenoro grįžti į Lietuvą priežastis, tai yra nepakankamas pragyvenimo lygis, atlyginimų ir socialinių garantijų skirtumai. Kitos minimos baimės dėl sugrįžimo, tai santykiai tarp žmonių, pirmiausia darbdavių ir darbuotojų, paplitęs darbuotojų išnaudojimas, darbdavių polinkis nesilaikyti teisės aktų, nenoras įdarbinti patirtį užsienyje įgijusių darbuotojų. Taip pat minima teisinė aplinka, kad valstybė vis dar per daug reguliuoja verslą, nuolat kaitaliojami teisės aktai, mokesčių dydžiai. Tokie ir panašus atsiliepimai šiaip girdimi iš daugelio užsienio lietuvių ir didžia dalimi jie yra susiję su ankstesne neigiama asmeninė arba girdėta patirtimi. Kartu tą tokią neigiamą nuomonę palaiko ir vis pasiekiančios informacijos iš Lietuvos, kadangi blogi dalykai yra geriau girdimi ir įsimenami nei geros naujienos. Viena iš konkretesnių išsakytų problemų kelia grįžimo galimybę svarstančių šeimos su vaikais. Jos prašo padidinti pagalbą grįžtančiams ir adaptacijos reikalaujantiems mokiniams, kurie grįžta į lietuviškas mokyklas, teigdami, kad egzistuojanti pagalbos grįžusiems iš kitakalbių mokyklų mokiniams sistema nėra pakankama arba tiesiog neveikia mažose mokyklose. Ir tuomet vaikai siunčiami į žemesnės klasės, nors atsilieka tik tai vienu dalyku kalbos žiniomis. Na, žinoma, BREXIT lietuvių bendruomenė Jungtinėje karalystėje vėl paskatino diskusijas dėl siekio įteisinti dvigubą pilietybę Lietuvoje. Nors rezidento statusas savaime turbūt užtikrintų daugumą tų teisių, kurias dabar turi ES piliečiai, tame tarpe lietuviai gyvendami Jungtinėje karalystėje, dalis mūsų tautiečių teigia, kad po BREXIT jie rinktųsi ir visišką integraciją į Jungtinę karalystę, tai būtent siektų įgyti pilietybę ir, žinoma, tai paskatino daugelį lietuvių organizacijų Jungtinėje karalystėje, pirmiausia, Jungtinės karalystės lietuvių bendruomenę, labai aktyviai kelti klausimą dėl Lietuvos pilietybės išsaugojimo, įgyjant kitos šalies pilietybę. Siekis išlaikyti Lietuvos pilietybę grindžiamas pirmiausia emocinių ryšių su tėvyne, bet žinoma kartu ir praktinėmis galimybėmis toliau naudotis Lietuvos piliečių teisėmis tiek Lietuvoje, tiek ir Europos Sąjungoje. Kalbant apie lietuvių bendruomenių veiklą susijusią su tautinio identiteto išlaikymu, lietuvių kalbos puoselėjimu, BREXIT tiesioginės ženklios įtakos turbūt neturėtų padaryti, kadangi ir šiuo metu veikianti paramos sistema nėra niekaip susijusi su Jungtinės karalystės buvimu Europos Sąjungoje. Tai yra vietos valdžia daugiausia padeda veiklai, kuri yra orientuota į žmonių integravimąsi į Britų visuomenę. Na, o Lietuvos pagalba turbūt nepriklausomai nuo BREXIT yra teikiama ir turėtų būti didinama tiek lietuviškų organizacijų stiprinimui, tiek ir lietuviniciniam švietimui. Nes mes matome, kad dabar paskutiniu laikotarpiu tikrai visoje Didžiojoje Britanijoje lietuvicinėse mokyklose daugėja vaikų skaičius iš lietuviškų ir iš mišrių šeimų. Pačios organizacijos kuriasi arba regioninių principų, arba interesų principų. Jos yra dažniausiai jaunos šeimos tik užgimė ir
Usually these are
kol
very young
jos
families,
negebės veikti savarankiškai, tai jom tikrai ta
and they
pagalba
are incapable
yra
of
būtina. Taigi,
functioning
trumpai gal
independently,
labai
and these
apibendrinant viską
families
vienu
need
sakiniu, tai
Lithuania's
būtent
assistance very much.
Jungtinėje karalystėje gyvenantys Lietuvos piliečiai
In
tikisi, kad
conclusion, I can say that
dėrybos
Lithuanian
bus
nationals living in
sėkmingos
the
ir
UK
greitos,
expects
sugrįžti
a smooth
grįžtančių
and
Lietuvo
rapid
didesnio skaičiaus galima
Brexit
tikėtis, kai
negotiation
ženkliai
process.
pagerės pragyvenimo
We
lygis
can
Lietuvoje.
expect a large number of them
Dauguma
coming back to
nusprendusių
Lithuania once the
kreiptis dėl
living standards in
Jungtinės karalystės
Lithuania
pilietybės
are
lietuvių tikisi, kad
improved.
jiems bus
And
sudarytos sąlygos išsaugoti Lietuvos
the
pilietybę.
Lithuanian nationals
Na ir
living
kalbant
in
apie
the
tautinį
UK
identitetą ir
expect
lietuvybės
to have
puoselėjimą,
the
tai
ability to
turėtų
preserve the
toliau
Lithuanian
vykti ir tęsis nepriklausomai nuo
citizenship.
Brexit dėrybų pabaigos.
And in
Dėkuoju
conclusion,
departamento
that they
direktoriui,
expect,
ambasadoriui
that their
Pinkui.
the
Dabar
quality
norėčiau
of
suteikti
life
žodį
will
finansų
not
viceministrei
change
Loretai
following,
Maskalieniai
Thank you
apie
very much.
Europos
Now I would like to
Sąjungos
give the
biudžeto
floor to Ms. Loreta
klausimus.
Maskalienė, Vice
Prašom.
Minister of Finance,
Ačiū labai.
to talk about EU
Tai
budget matters.
be abejo pats jautriausias ir svarbiausias
Thank you.
ES piliečių
This
dėrybų
is
klausimas,
perhaps one of
bet
the most
turbūt
sensitive issues related to
neišvengiamai, kaip ir kiekvienose dėrybose, finansinių
However, it is unavoidable that
klausimų,
as in all
diskusijos
the
apie tai ir biudžetinių
negotiations,
įsipareigojimų
it is
vykdymas
necessary to
bus
speak
vienas iš
about
plačiausiai
the
diskutuojamų turbūt
budgetary
ir viešoje
commitments.
erdvėje ir diskusijose
issue
dėl
will be widely
ES
covered
ir
in public
UK santykių
space.
ateities. Bet visų pirma, turbūt turėtume
first
tikrai
of all, I
palaikyti ir
believe
sutarti
we
dėl vieno
should
dalyko.
agree
Labai
upon
svarbu
one
išlaikyti
very
tą
important
seką,
thing.
dėl kurios mes
It is
diskutuojam.
very important
Tai
to
visų pirma,
maintain
susitarėme
the
dėl tų
sequence
įsipareigojimų ir piliečių
of,
teisių
issues. First of all, we have
skirybų
to agree about
kontekste
the
ir po to
rights
tik
of our
pradedam
citizens
šnekėti apie tai, kokie santykiai mūsų laukia
in the
su UK
process
ateityje.
and after,
Tai
and then we can
be abejo,
shift to
visi
the
suprantame,
future of our
kad UK
relations
buvo
after
stiprus ir svarbus
the withdrawal,
mokėtojas
after
į
UK's
ES
withdrawal.
biudžetą.
Of course, we understand that the
Ir
UK has
lyginant su tuo,
been a
kiek
very,
būdavo įmokama kasmet ir
important
gauna
contributor
pati
to the European
UK
Union
kaip
budget.
gavėja per visus skirtingus finansavimo šaltinius, tai
the same
skirtumas
time
buvo
it
10
was
milijardų, tai reiškia, kad ta suma ir diskusijose ir yra,
receiver of funds,
ar tie
whereas the
įsipareigojimai,
difference
dėl
was
kurių mes
about
šiandien
10
sutarėm
billion
dėl
euros.
visos finansinės perspektyvos ir
So
jinai yra
when we
nedaloma
speak about,
14-20 turiuomenį,
the total,
tai ar tie garbingi
financial
įsipareigojimai bus
framework
vykdomi
of
ir kaip tos
2014-2020,
dėrybos
the
vykdysis
question
abipusiai.
arises,
Tai
how
jeigu šnekėti
will
turbūt
UK,
apie kelis
follow
scenarijus,
its
kas galėtų
commitments,
būti
budgetary
ir
commitments.
Lietuvai aktualu
Several
ir
scenarios
privalumai ir
are
trūkumai, tai
possible
aišku
here,
palankiausias ir
and,
garbingiausias
one of the
yra
most
scenarijus,
favorable
kai abi
scenarios
šalis,
is
turiuomenė
that both
ES
the sides,
valstybės
I mean
27 ir UK, susitarė dėl
27
įsipareigojimų
member
ir
states
UK
and the
įvykdo
UK
visus
agree upon
įsipareigojimus,
all
dėl
the
kurių dabar
commitments, and the
ir
UK,
diskutuojama, kiek apie 60 milijardų tų
fulfills
įsipareigojimų dėl
all
visos
the
finansinės perspektyvos, bet be abejo tai
In
dar
total
bus
is
diskusijos apie tai,
60
kaip
billion
tas
euro.
mokėjimas įsidėsto
Then the
laikė,
question is
nes
how
tai
the
ne vien tik tai
payments will be
20 metais
distributed in time.
ar ne vien tik tai 14-20 mokėjimai vyksta, bet vyksta mokėjimai ir po 20 metų, tai reiškia, kad tas objektas taip pat bus dėrybų, kaip sąskaitos apmokėjimos išdėstamos laikė ir po 20 metų.
future
Tai
after 2020.
prie kitų mažiau sėkmingų scenarijų, diskusinių
Looking at
scenarijų,
other
tai turbūt
less
kas vyktų, jeigu
successful
UK
scenarios being discussed.
tikėtina iš jų pusės nesvarstomas tas variantas visai atsisakytų
An
tų įsipareigojimų, dėl kurių buvo
alternative may be
sutarta
heard that
14-20 daugiametiniai perspektyvai. Tai kaip minėjau,
refuses all the commitments
19-20 turėtume
altogether,
likusios šalis,
which means that in
27 šalis sutarti dėl tų
2019,
10
the
milijardų
remaining
skirtumo
27
ir
countries
kaip juos
will have
padengti.
to agree
Ir
about
čia
the
galimi
10 billion
dar du
difference and how
scenarijai,
to
tai
cover
reiškia
it.
arba mes mažiname
two
savo tuos
scenarios are
tikslus,
possible
dėl
here.
kurių buvom
Either
sutarę
we,
14-20,
reduce
kokių
our
tikslų ir kokių
goals
rodiklių, ekonominių
agreed
rodiklių, investicinių rodiklių
previously,
mes buvom sutarę pasiekti.
regarding,
Tai reiškia,
financial
tiesiog mažėja
indicators,
ES biudžetas,
which means that
kas
the budget
irgi
of the
turbūt
EU
visom
will
ES
decrease,
valstybėm nebūtų
would
visai palankus
decrease,
variantas, o
which would
Lietuvai
not be,
taip
of
pat, nes
course,
visi turime
favorable
tam
to
tikrus
European
programuotus
Union
dokumentus
member
ir tam
states,
tikras
including
investicijas
Lithuania,
ir tie
because
projektai,
we
apie ką
have
mes jau
some
pradžioje diskutavom, tikrai yra prasidėję
and
ir
projects
įsipareigojimai
that have
priimti.
already started,
Kitas
commitments have
scenarius
been undertaken,
mažai tikėtinas,
whereas the
bet
second
turbūt
scenario, which
būtų
is
irgi
not
nelabai
very
palankus
likely,
visom
however,
valstybėm,
not
tai yra sutrumpinimas dabartinės finansinės perspektyvos, bet tai yra, žinant visas biurokratinės ir ilgas procedūras, tai yra mažai tikėtinas dėl to, kad reikėtų labai greitai susimobilizuoti ir peržiūrėti dabartinę finansinę perspektyvą, dabartinius įsipareigojimus, kas buvo suplanuota ir suprogramuota 14-20 perspektyvai, na ir nebejotinai tada tie įsipareigojimai ir ambicijos, kurios buvo 14-20 sumažėtų ir susitarimai. Bet žiūrint į priekį, kad jau dabar pats laikas pradėti diskutuoti, kas bus po 20 metų su ES daugiametinė finansinė perspektyva ir dabar jau ir BREXIT kontekste, ir parlamento rinkimų kontekste, ir pokyčiuose jau matosi galimas vėlavimas net ir laiku užbaigus netrumpintas šitos finansinės perspektyvos, tai mažai tikėtina, kad galėtume suspėti perdėrėti ir peržiūrėti dabartinę finansinę perspektyvą. Tai tokie daugiau mažiau scenarijai laukia ir Lietuvos ir aišku, mes labai aktyviai diskutuosim ir žiūrėsim ir skaičiuosim, koks scenarijus aktyviai dalyvausim ir dėrybose ir teikiant poziciją Lietuvos. Bet turbūt visi suprantame, kai dėl šitų įsipareigojimų sutarsime, tai ir ta pati UK turi tam tikrus interesus ir tikrai aktyvų norą dalyvauti ir tolesniuose santykiuose su ES, tai be abejo tai dalis ir įmokų ir finansavimo tam tikrų programų išliks ir tikrai apie tai jau pasisakoma UK išreikštoje baltoje knygoje išleistoje, kurioje pasakoma, kad labai svarbios rytis yra ir moksliniai tyrimai, studentų mainų programos, tos rytis, dėl kurių tikrai UK norėtų ir toliau išlaikyti tam tikrus santykius, tai reiškia, kad ir finansavimo prasme tai yra indėlis jos į bendradarbiavimą su ES valstybėm. Tai
Dėkuoju viceministrai, dabar apie mūsų bendradarbiavimą su Jungtinė karalystė saugumo ir gynybos klausimais kviečiu pasisakyti krašto apsaugos viceministrą Vytautą Umbrasą.
Ačiū, gerbiami Seimo nariai, ekscelencijos ambasadoriai, mėly kolegos. Iš tikro, BREXIT nėra eilinis procesas, tai toks vėjo šuoras, kuris drebina visą ES pastatą. Nesinori, kad griūnant vienam iš atraminių stulpų, pastatas kaip nors čia sibuotų ir norisi, kad visą tai būtų modifikuojama taip, kad dar stabiliau mes čia laikytumėmės ir pastatas būtų stabilesnis. Labai tikiuosi, kad saugumas ir gynyba taps ES ir Jungtinė karalystė jungiančiais elementais, nes mūsų visų, mūsų valstybių piliečių saugumas yra pagrindas, ant kurio statoma gerovė, kultūra, kiti svarbus elementai. Taigi, ką reiškia BREXIT saugumo gynybos srity, kokią įtaką jis gali turėti mūsų ir visos ES saugumui? Norint atsakyti į šitą klausimą, pirmiausia, reikia apibrėžti Jungtinės karalystės svarbą ES saugumui. Čia, manau, galima išskirti tris esminius elementus. Pirma, transatlantinį ryšį. Antra, Europos šiaurės regiono konsolidavimą ir Jungtinės karalystės lyderystę. Ir trečia, vaidmenį ES. Kalbant apie transatlantinį ryšį, manau, nieko naujo nepasakysiu teigdamas, kad tiek Lietuvos, tiek visos Europos saugumas ir gynyba labai priklauso nuo Jungtinių Amerikos valstijų. Prasidėjus neramumams Ukrainoje, būtent Jungtinių valstijų naikintuvai pirmiausia nutūpė Baltijos šalyse, netrukus turėjome ir JAV kareivius kaip įsipareigojimo ženklą bei perspėjimą galimam agresoriui. JAV visuomet žengia tą svarbų pirmąjį žingsnį, kas atsižvelgiant į grėsmių mūsų saugumui pobūdį yra gyvybiškai svarbu. Europa pati viena dar nėra pajėgi užtikrinti savo gynybos, todėl kertinis mūsų interesas yra tvirtas transatlantinis ryšis, kuris reiškia Jungtinių Amerikos valstijų pajėgų JAV interesų išlaikymą tiek apskritai Europoje, tiek ypatingai mūsų regione. O Jungtinė karalystė yra ir tikiu išliks bene svarbiausių transatlantinio ryšio garantų Europoje. Ar BREXIT pakeis šią dinamiką? Manau, kad vargu netgi atvirkščiai. Jungtinė karalystė tikėtina dar labiau angažuosis į santykių su JAV stiprinimą ir savo vaidmens saugumo ir gynybos srityje įtvirtinimą per NATO. Europos šiaurės regiono konsolidavime ir Jungtinės karalystės lyderystėje iš tikrųjų matydami augančią Rusijos grėsmę, kuri neapsiriboja vien tik Kaliningrado militarizavimu, laisvo sąjungininkų judėjimo Baltijos valstybių regione suvaržymu, bet apima ir logistikos užtikrinimą tarp Europos ir Amerikos bei panašias problemas, turinčias įtakos jau ne tik šiaurės regiono valstybių, bet ir viso alijanso saugumui. Čia Jungtinės karalystės vaidmuo ir lyderystė yra be galo svarbi. Vienas kelių, kurie eidami siekiame didinti savo saugumą, yra regioninio bendradarbiavimo stiprinimas. Turime gerai išplėtotą bendradarbiavimą tarp Baltijos šalių, tolygiai augantį bendradarbiavimą su šiaurės valstybėmis. Prieš keletą metų prie regioninio bendradarbiavimo prisijungė Jungtinė karalystė ir regiono problematikos aptarimą ir sprendimų paiešką įtraukdama ir keletą kitų svarbių regiono valstybių, tokių kaip Vokietija, Lenkija, Nyderlandai. Taip gimė šiaurės grupės formatas saugumo ir gynybos srityje, bei sėkmingai plėtojamas Jungtinės karalystės vadovaujamas Jungtinių ekspedicijų pajėgų, taip vadinamas Joint Expeditionary Forces projektas, apjungiantis 3 Baltijos šalis, Norvegiją,
combining
Daniją,
the 3 Baltic states, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands and the UK, the goal of which is to establish very rapid reaction joint forces, which is especially important for us when it comes to conventional defense. The UK is essentially trying to establish forces similar to the US, which could be employed for taking rapid decisions, especially in the framework of NATO. It's another example of UK's engagement and leadership in our region is the decision to become the leading country of the multinational NATO battalion in Estonia, which also demonstrates UK's commitment to the protection of the eastern borders of the alliance. So when it comes to the regional level cooperation, we can see the UK's engagement in the Nordic and Baltic region, which is manifested by its willingness to address the regional problems. Will Brexit change this dynamics? I believe no, and I hope it will not, because it's the security, regional security of the Nordic and Baltic region also reflects UK's interests. When it comes to the role of the EU, if we cannot see any negative outcomes of Brexit to the previous 2 elements, when it comes to the role of the EU, I believe Brexit outcomes will be very obvious. With the withdrawal of the UK, it will become obvious that the contribution by EU member states into NATO will account for only 17%. That is why we won't be able to expect greater ambitions by Europe with regards to defense and security. In order to change the current situation, we have tried to increase our defense funding, and we can say that Trump's administration has positively shook our countries. For us, it was always important not to overlap the EU and NATO forces. The UK has also represented the rational side to these discussions. With the withdrawal of the UK, our region, the transatlantic partners, will remain without a very obvious leader of the group, and we will have to redefine our place in this group, as well as our policy in the new EU, hoping that the new vacuum will be filled by the change in Germany. The new dynamics in the EU has also caused some uneasiness. With the withdrawal of the UK, there is still uncertainty as to the coordination with the actions with the NATO, and the competition might be detrimental for us. So, to conclude, if we want to expect the UK's withdrawal not to affect our cooperation, we are, however, concerned about the outcome of the UK's withdrawal, both for the EU as well as for our cooperation with NATO, which can affect our national security and defense as well.
Thank you, Vice Minister. Now we shift to the interests of our business representatives, and therefore I am honored to give the floor to the Executive Director of the Lithuanian Confederation of Industrialists, Giedrė Švedienė. Your Excellencies, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Seimas, yes, indeed, I will present the attitude of our business representative, business sector towards Brexit. In the beginning, I will show you the economic interests of Lithuania. Then I will come to our expectations and also speak about what our business sector expects from Brexit negotiations. Well, to speak what kind of impact Brexit will have on Lithuania and other member states, as mentioned before, today is a bit too early, because we still don't know what model will be chosen, nor what result the negotiations will lead to. However, what we can say today already is that the United Kingdom is a very important economic and trade partner for Lithuania. Back in 2016, the UK was ranking the 9th among all trade partners, and the turnover of goods amounted to 1.6 million. The UK was the 8th biggest direction of Lithuania's export, and looking at all the European Union member states, it's accounted for 7% of the overall export to member states. If we look just only at the products of goods of Lithuanian origin, its position is the 6th. Lithuania's export to the UK has dropped in the course of the last 5 years. Let's say it dropped by 6.4% in 2015 and 2016. But today we speak not only about the amounts of export, but also the exchange rate between the pound sterling and in relation to euro, as well as the prices of oil and fertilizers, which were rather lower compared to the previous period. If we eliminate fertilizers and oil, as well as changes of the exchange rate of the UK's pound sterling, actually the export of Lithuanian goods to the UK has increased. Probably we could not expect a very different result in 2017. This is the slide which illustrates the export structure of Lithuania. Furniture accounts for the biggest share of the commodities of Lithuanian origin to the UK. Then comes mineral, fuel, plastics, timber, fertilizers, textile, food products, and as promised before, I now will speak about the results of our expectations. We make such a survey on a quarterly basis, and while conducting our last research, we included a question about Brexit. One of the questions we have asked our companies, our enterprises, was whether they had already felt the effect of Brexit in their activities. More than 80% of companies gave a negative result. They haven't yet felt the effect, whereas 18.3% answered positively, yes. And even despite the fact that this survey was conducted in the end of last year, when we didn't discuss Brexit so much, yet the answer that many companies have felt this impact is quite impressive. Then there was a question, what scope of impact they have felt, and many companies answered that they have primarily felt the impact of the exchange rate. Next was the question about the kind of effect Brexit might have on their activities.
Gali tikėtis savo apyvartos sumažėjimo 1%. Apie
43% of companies answered they may anticipate a lower turnover. About 20% said they may experience the drop in their turnover, about 20%. Primarily, there were companies related to manufacturing of food products and drinks, and we actually associate these answers and these possible changes with Russia's embargo and sanctions, which has an inevitable effect on our companies. And the third question we have asked the companies was, what measures have you undertaken to avoid the Brexit impact? Almost half of the companies answered that they have contacted their clients, they got involved in the search for new markets, and there were about 70% of those who said that they would consider their restructuring or even sacking some human resources. A conclusion can be made here that at the time when we made the survey, the companies stated they didn't feel a very big impact of Brexit. However, some of them were quite concerned already. And actually, these were the questions that we have raised to our companies for the first time. And in the course of Brexit negotiations, we are going to come back to these questions again. Next, I would like to focus on some processes that Lithuanian Confederation of Industrialists is involved, and how we view the Brexit process, as well as touch upon our expectations in this context. As you know, the Lithuanian business sector has its representative, Business Europe, and in the course of the last few months, these questions have been thoroughly discussed, and our confederation has presented its positions on all the issues that were discussed in Brussels. Lithuanian business sector finds these questions very important. These are the areas where we can face serious risks, and our business sector is interested to participate in the processes and make some influence here. First of all, I would like to mention customs fees and customs procedures, where the business sector believes that additional costs might emerge for transportation companies. More complex procedures will be introduced. Preferential regimes will be also affected. And speaking about the UK, very similar issues come to the focus. because new tariffs might emerge, new human resources, human capital with additional competences will be required. As we already heard today, changes are quite possible as far as it comes to legal regulation, because a revision of legal acts will be necessary, of course. The goods might be exposed to new testing, even though a transitional period will be introduced. Nevertheless, the European Union and the UK might see the needs in the regulation field differently. Let's say if we take the service sector, which covers both the financial and the data aspects, I believe that as business sector sees the professional qualifications, free movement of people, financial services across the border, accessibility of capital, negotiations with the World Trade Organization have a significant role. As far as the public procurement is concerned, even though the EU market is quite open, both European Union operators and the third countries operators have different rules of the game. This is why this issue will have to be resolved. Looking at the protection of investments, protection of intellectual property rights are the fields that will have to be revised, and the companies might experience additional costs relating to regulation of, let's say, intellectual property rights. Then speaking about competition and trade protection measures, the UK will have to introduce new provisions which will have an impact on existing and future deals and agreements. As for sanctions and export control, the EU has a comprehensive regulation related to sanctions, and we have already mentioned some sanctions on Russia, North Korea, Iran. So the question is which way the UK is going to choose, whether it will pursue the European Union way or have some different regulation here. And the last important field is relations with the third countries. In the context of the European Union, we speak about free trade agreements that have already been negotiated, and those who are just pending. And the question will emerge whether the existing treaties and agreements will have to be reviewed, which way the UK will choose. These are the issues that the business sector is concerned about, and the answer to which we do not yet have today. This is the slide that also shows information of what we have already touched upon. This is the situation that Lithuania's transport sector raises today. This is the market access, cabotage permit, technical cargo regulation, penalties, and other things that we are really concerned about and that will be reflected in the negotiations, as we believe. What the business sector expects from the negotiations primarily is preservation of the single market, which is based on four main freedoms. The relations between the EU and the UK, close relations, are also within our interests. And that the transfer to the new system and the new model is smooth, and that business representatives are given time to adapt to the new conditions. As for the negative aspect of Brexit, our interest is to minimize this effect both for companies and citizens, and that the new model will provide legal certainty and that all the solutions are taken in a wise manner and are predictable period. And we also believe that all the interested parties and stakeholders should have their place in the discussion, not only politicians and political organizations. And just a few words about what is going on in our Confederation of Industrialists today. As I mentioned, all these issues are really very important to us, and quite recently we have established a working group for Brexit impact assessment, which includes representatives of different fields, including chemistry, pharmacy, textile, plastics, timber. And the main goal of the main task for this working group will be to assess Brexit impact on various fields of our industry, and also to table proposals with relation to Lithuania's negotiating positions. We very much hope that our opinion will be considered and that our voice will be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Švedienė, for a very interesting presentation, and let us throw into discussion. Any questions, remarks?
Tiesą pasakius, nematau norinčių.
Well, I actually don't see any hands. Oh, yes, please.
Ačiū, ponia pirmininkė. Tikrai
Thank you,
nenorėjau
Mr. Chairman.
kalbėti pirmas, bet
Well, I didn't want to take the floor the first, but
truputį
since
pakomentuoti norėčiau, jeigu galima.
there's nobody else willing to ask, if I may, I would like to make a few comments of my own.
Kaltos abi pusės.
As we may know, when it comes to
Mes
divorce,
kažkodėl visai nepripažįstam
there are always both
Europos
sides
Sąjungos
that are to be
pusės
blamed.
kaltės.
And for some reason, we fail
manyčiau,
to
kad,
address the blame on behalf of the EU.
Pas mus per didelis tas toksai entuziazmas kilęs, aš turiu
We
omeny
happen
Europoje,
to be
dėl
too enthusiastic
tokio
in Europe
federalizacijos, pavadinkim, proceso. Ir jis neišvengiamai
with regards to
tą
the
tokį atoveiksmį
European
iššaukė.
federalization, and
Jungtinėj
it's
karalystėj. Ir ten tie keli
caused
procentai
a
skirtumo tarp
certain
išeit ar neišeit Britam galėjo
response.
būti nulemti to
And I believe
vadinu
this
entuziazmu.
also
O kas jį sukelia dažnai ne
this was also
valstybės
related
atskiros,
to
bet būtent didžiulis
the
eurokratų
current
aparatas
divorce.
Briusely. Gal aš čia
What is also
nemadingai
related
šneku,
to our
bet-
divorce
bet iš
process
tikrųjų
is
tai
the current
tarytum
bureaucratic
ginklas toks
machine in Brussels,
raginantis.
which is functioning as if a
Tai apie šitą tolimesnį tas derybų procesas.
flag
Mes
encouraging
dabar mūsų
everyone
aukšti pareigūnai kalba toliau
to do
apie tą
something the way it
brandolį,
wants.
kad mes eisim tik į tą brandolį. Žodžiu, tarsi
At the
su
moment
visu
we're
tuo
discussing,
raginimo procesu mes sutinkam.
the
Aš manyčiau,
encouragement
kad dabar
of moving
tikrai
into the
būtina
nucleus
pauzė
of the
Europos
countries.
Sąjungoj.
But I believe the
Būtent
EU now needs to
federalizacijos
take a
kryptim, kad
break
vėl neiššauktumėm naujų Brexitų.
so that we do
Na,
not
atsiprašau, kad
evoke
aš
any
ilgai
new
komentuoju, bet
Brexit.
kaip
I'm sorry for
žmogus,
taking
kuris
so much
pirmas
time, but
dirbo
as a
kažkada
person who
Briusely,
used to be
ir tos
working in
jaučiau
Brussels
įtaką
since the beginning of our membership, I
90-ų
sensed the
Dėkoju, iš ties įdomus komentaras, mes visi
urge
lyginame
by the
su
bureaucrats in
šeimų skyrybom,
Brussels
bet aš negalėčiau
myself.
su jumis sutikti, kad
Well, thank
visuomet
you. We're
yra
all working
kaltos abi pusės.
we're all aware of the divorce issues, but there's not always two sides to the conflict. There's always the husband and the wife to be blamed, or there's a case when one of them is to be blamed, or there's also a case when there's nobody to be blamed. I'm sorry, but there are always both sides to be blamed. The percentage, however, is different.
Tai nereikėtų priimti kaip aksiomą. Gyvenimas yra įvairesnis negu jūsų pasiūlyta schema. Prašom, kas norėtų diskutuoti. Prašau.
Labadiena visiems. Aš norėčiau paklausti apie tos galimus scenarius. Mes daug girdime
I would like
apie
to
galimą
ask about the future scenarios. We hear a lot about this hard scenario that should intimidate others, but don't you think that it might be detrimental to both sides? Or can we expect that both sides will agree on the soft measures of withdrawal from the EU? Well, I'm not sure that the negotiations should deter from any future actions. I believe the negotiations should be taken on friendly terms, that they should be fair, and that they should take into consideration the interests of both sides. So who here would like to answer the question? Or if I could add to what you have said, Mr. Chairman, there are definitely several scenarios, and from what we've heard from Mr. Juncker, the process of negotiations is already mentioned in the beginning of this discussion. It will not be a very easy process. The hard Brexit scenario is a very realistic one, and coming to terms with the financial aspects will be very difficult to do. That is why, having in mind the very short period of time, the 18 months for the actual withdrawal of the UK from the EU, it will be very difficult to agree and to satisfy the interests of both sides. The UK is a very important partner for us, so we have to strike the right balance, and the program or the agenda of federalization shouldn't be pushed so much as it has been up until now, because this has a negative effect rather than the contrary. And we should therefore strike a balance in the EU as a union of different nations and of diverse cultures, which is the essence of this project. Mr. Žubalis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When it comes to the hard, soft, or whatever Brexit, I believe the analysts have already placed the member states into different groups, and so Lithuania finds itself in the group of countries which favor soft negotiation differently from Austria, Bulgaria, Romania. Romania and Bulgaria have their own interests into perspective, and just like Spain, they will try to get something for themselves if we have in mind the Gibraltar issue or others. So when it comes to Lithuanian politics, I believe we should strengthen the Nordic-Baltic cooperation format. And on the other hand, look for allies which could be in favor of the hard Brexit. But I would like to have Ms. Švedienė going back to one of her slides where she told us about the possible implications of Brexit in the negotiations. I believe you've demonstrated several different areas. Yes, I think that's the one. Could you wind back a little bit? The one where you enlisted, yes, that's the one. Whether we will have any impact in these areas, it's very difficult to expect at this point.
tam tikrų žingsnių, kurie
It's very
užkirs kelią šitai valstybei, jos verslui
difficult to
į
expect
ES
that
rinką.
the UK would prevent entering Lithuania's business into the UK,
Tai bus abipusis efektas.
whichever area we take.
Poveikis, aš manau, kad tai bus labai minimalus poveikis.
So the impact of Brexit that we might expect should be minimum, I believe, because the UK loses
Kas gali padaryti staigių
half
žingsnius? Tai
a
būtent tie
billion
Europos Sąjungoje, kurie pasisako už kietas
market.
derybas. Ačiū.
So
Dėkoju, prašom. Seimo narė Budbergytė, taip pat pavaduota Europos komiteto pirmininką.
Ačiū labai, gerbiamas posėdžio pirmininkė. Aš norėčiau tiesiog pakalbėti apie vieną tokį aspektą, kur, man atrodo, mums reikia ypatingai Lietuvai turėti omenyje. Kad žinoma, kalbame kaip politikai visi mandagiai ir diplomatiškai, ir jūs tai ypatingai kaip užsienio reikalų komiteto pirmininkas mokate daryti. Tačiau aš norėčiau atkreipti dėmesį į tai, kad kalbant apie interesus, jūs sakant, kad pirmiausia visada, žinoma, yra žmonių interesai, piliečių interesai. Aš vis dėlto galvoju, kad Lietuvai, kalbant apie poveikį Brexito, kurį gali padaryti, tai iš tiesų yra labai svarbus tas aspektas susitelkimo ir išlaikymo vienybės, kaip užsienio viceministras paminėjo, iš tiesų, kad tai buvo kaip žadintuvo skambutis, pasakant Europai, kad reikia mums susitelkti ir čia yra svarbiausia iš tiesų, kad mes neįsisklaidytumėm. Tačiau dėrybos bus sunkios, nėra ką čia kalbėti. Ambasadorė Neliupšienė labai aiškiai tai pasakė.
It is quite obvious that the negotiation process will be a very complicated one, and Ambassador Neliupšienė has rightly put it. Every country will have its own very different interests at stake during the 18-month-long negotiation process and following it.
Ir iš tiesų susiklausimas, kad išliktumėm Europos Sąjungoje kaip garantija tos mūsų saugumo ir visos tos neaiškios ateities yra tikriausiai vienas iš tiesų iš svarbiausių prioritetų. Todėl Lietuva ir turi taip pat apie tai galvoti ne tik tai apie ekonominius interesus, bet ir apie tai, kad mes turime tikrai būti kažkokiame branduolyje.
Also think of the ways how to be into any nucleus of countries. And so today we've heard a number of times mentioning this nucleus. So can we receive an answer from anyone which countries form the nucleus in the EU? Thank you.
Tai aš tiesą pasakius nepamenu, kas apie branduolį kalbėjo, gal tie galėtų ir atsakyti.
Who mentioned the nucleus countries, so perhaps those people could be answer
tai galbūt apibendrinant šitą diskusiją
in the first part of today's event. So perhaps as we sum up our discussion, we will be able to come back to that. So anybody else willing to take the floor?
Well,
I could comment the question on the nucleus countries as well. I believe the EU 2017 is the nucleus, so the problem will probably be having swift and fast negotiations with the 27 member states, because we have always knew that each and every EU member state is very diverse and has its own interests, and today's discussion even demonstrated the different ideas that we have among ourselves. So the nucleus countries, to my mind, are the remaining EU 27 member states. Well, today indeed we have discussed the importance of unity of the EU 27, and we've also highlighted on the different interests. And the former foreign minister has rightly mentioned the approach of our region with regards to Brexit, and that we are interested in having a soft Brexit based on consensus rather than
yra stipresnis,
highlighting
tai tokie interesai yra ir turbūt tie interesai valstybių skirtingi, bet labai svarbu, kad nepaisant skirtingų interesų, dėrybose mes būtume vieningi kaip
what is most
ES,
important
tik
is
tai
that
garantuoja
despite the
sėkmę mums
differences in the
visiems.
negotiating process,
Kadangi nematau
we
norinčių
have to
diskutuoti,
stay
tai noriu
united.
suteikti
Since
žodį
I don't see anybody else
šią
willing
diskusiją
to
Europos
engage into
reikalų
the
komiteto
discussion, I would
pirmininko
like to give the floor to
pavaduotojui,
Mr.
užsienio reikalų komiteto nariui Mindaugui Puidokui.
Mindaugas
Jis tai jau
Puidokas,
pradėjo,
member
aš
of the
manau,
Foreign
pratęs.
Affairs Committee as well as Deputy Chair of the Seimas Committee on European Affairs, to sum up our discussion.
Gerbimi kolegos, Seimo nariai,
Colleagues,
Ekscelencijos ambasadoriai,
members of the Parliament,
susirinkusieji.
Your Excellencies,
Iš tiesų,
ambassadors,
Didžiosios
ladies and
Britanijos
gentlemen,
sprendimas po
well, indeed,
43
the decision of the
metų
UK
palikti
to leave
Europos
the
Sąjungą
European
tapo
Union
žadinančiu
after
signalu
43
visoms
years
šalims narėms.
have come as a
Privalome susirūpinti,
wake-up call
suprasti,
for
kad
all the
procesai
countries
visi būna abipusiai
of Europe.
ir
And as we
turim
understand,
mąstyti
we
apie
always have a
tolesnę
bilateral
Europos
process,
Sąjungos raidą,
and
galvoti,
therefore
kuris
it is
iš
necessary
scenarijų
to
leistų
think
sutelkti
about the
geriausiai
future
visas
development
27
scenario
Europos
for
Sąjungos
the
nares.
EU,
Šiuo atveju pritariu
including the
Arnoldui
27
Pranckevičiui, kuris
countries,
įvardino,
and I
kad
agree with
visų pirma,
Arnoldas Pranckevičius,
derybose dėl
who
Brexito
said that in the
privalome
negotiations,
vadovautis blaiviu protu,
in the Brexit
o ne
negotiations,
emocijomis.
we
Privalome vadovautis
first
teise.
of all need
Ir
the
kad tai
common
galėtų
sense,
įvykti, būtent
and we
visas tas
have
Europos
to
Sąjungos
apply
27 šalių
the
darinys turės
legal
gebėti būti mobilus
instruments.
ir atrasti bendrus
The process will
sprendinius
have
ir
to
išeiti su
be
vieninga
mobile
nuomonė. Nes Jungtiniai karalystėje tą
smooth,
vieningą nuomonę atrasti, kadangi jinai yra viena valstybė, yra žymiai
so
lengviau
that
šiose
we
derybose.
come out with an
Ir
unanimous
natūralu, kad
voice.
tokiu būdu pats derybų procesas tampa ganėtinai komplikuotas.
The negotiation
Ir tas, kas
process
buvo
becomes
įvardinta vėlgi jau
quite
pačiame
complicated.
pristatyme, mes
And
aiškiai
as we heard in
matysime,
the
kad
very
per 18
beginning, we will
mėnesių
see that in the
susitarti
course
dėl
of
visų tų
18
dalykų
years it will be
tikrai
extremely
nebus
difficult
paprasta. Galbūt
to
jau pasikartosiu šioje
find
vietoje.
a
Kita vertus,
common
įžanginį žodį tarė
attitude
Kotrynas Kirkilas ir
towards
Jozefas
all
Bernatonis
the
aiškiai įvardino
outstanding
esminius Brexit
points.
iššūkius. Tai
We
visų
have already
pirma,
heard a lot
Lietuvos
about the
piliečių apsauga
challenges
Jungtinėje
that we will have to
karalystėje.
face.
Tai šiuo atveju
Protection
gerai,
of
kad
Lithuanian
tos
citizens
apsaugos
in the UK,
klausimai kaip interesas,
first of
ką
all,
išgirdom iš
and
Ekscelencijos Jungtinės karalystės
I'm glad that
ambasadorės,
what we heard from
sutampa
the
šitoje
British
vietoje,
ambassador and
interesai su
from what
Lietuva,
we
taip
would
pat ir su
expect
kitomis Europos Sąjungos
is
šalimis,
really
nes Didžiajai Britanijai nėra naudinga neišspręsti šių problemų, dėl to, kad Europos Sąjungos šalių
something
piliečiai,
that
kurie gyvena
makes us
Jungtinėje karalystėje,
satisfied
įneša
because
labai
the
svarbų
fate
indėlį
of
į
the
Jungtinės karalystės rinką.
our
Ir aš manau,
nationals
kad
living
tie
in the
sprendiniai
UK
apsaugant mūsų piliečių,
is
Lietuvos
the
atveju
issue
beveik
that we feel
170
quite
tūkstančių piliečių
concerned.
teises Jungtinėje karalystėje.
Their rights
Tikrai
in the
tie
UK,
bendri sprendiniai
where
turės
we
būti
need
rasti.
common solutions
Brexit,
to.
vėlgi kitas skausmingiausias
Another
klausimas, tai yra Jungtinės karalystės
alarming
finansiniai
issue
įsipareigojimai
is
Europos
related
Sąjungai,
to
tai yra
financial
60 milijardų
commitments
eurų. Ši
of
suma
the
yra
UK,
ganėtinai didelė ir jinai apima
amounting
tokius
to
svarbius
60
tęstinius
billion
projektus,
euros,
kaip
and it's linked to
sanglaudą, žemės
very
ūkį,
important
CEF,
projects
Ignalinos atominės
in
elektrinės abu
common
reaktorius ir jų
agricultural
uždarimą,
policy,
taipogi Rail Baltica.
Rail Baltica, as well as the commissioning of the nuclear power plant in Lithuania, which are extremely significant to all of us. So the negotiations will also, the outcomes of the negotiations will have a lot of influence on them. Striking the right balance of the budget will be also the issue of importance not only to Lithuania but to the European Union member states as well. The Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Zananavičius, has raised a number of issues as to how the Brexit process will affect the European Union economic and trade relations. Perhaps new rules will be put in place after the UK withdraws from the EU. So I believe that the search for this model will bring us to a similar scenario to which we have in the relations of the European Union with other European countries which are not members of the EU, let's say Switzerland, Norway. Let's say Switzerland is a neutral country and has no specific plans to join the EU. And I believe that the UK UK is a very important constituent part of the European Union. Therefore, very efficient solutions are required here, particularly as far as the economic relations are concerned. The Lithuanian ambassador Jovita Neliupšienė said that we can feel the impact of Brexit already, and a good thing is that it served as a wake-up call which made other EU member states to come closer together. And I believe that we will have this unity in the future, because otherwise we will have to acknowledge that we can find ourselves in a very big crisis. When I recently visited Stockholm, in the format that covers Nordic Baltic 8, what the Vice Minister mentioned, the issues related to national security and defense are of primary importance. Our expectation is that the cooperation between the Nordic and Baltic states includes the United Kingdom as well. And today it is heading the international battalion in Estonia, as we already heard. And I believe that these 9 countries are the strongest allies within the construct of NATO already today. And most probably we should make every effort to maintain this cooperation and even expand it. Germany is leading the multinational battalion of NATO in Lithuania, and if we also add the Netherlands and expand the cooperation to the whole region by becoming even a stronger ally to the US. Another dilemma which is also painful to Lithuania and other member states is whether the aspiration to represent Lithuanian citizens should prevail in these negotiations, or whether we primarily strive to preserve the unity of 27 member states and interests. Probably we don't have a simple answer to this, because striking the right balance is always essential. And Lithuanian politicians and negotiators will face a very important task in representing the interest of Lithuanian citizens, and at the same time do everything possible to preserve the unity of the 27 member states. Ambassador Claire Lawrence confirmed that the need of our citizens in the UK, are quite understandable, and when speaking about cooperation on bilateral and multilateral level, are understandable.
Ir aš manau, kad pritariu šitoje vietoje gerbiamam Audroniui Ažubaliui, kad Jungtinė karalystė
Mr. Ažubalis mentioned, the UK hopefully will positively view the prospects of the economic cooperation in the future and have the benefit for all the parties. And this is where we will also have to look for common solutions. Speaking about the expectations of the Lithuanian nationals residing in the UK, they are versatile, and Brexit already sparked the discussion about the dual citizenship. The discussions
ta iniciatyva tikrai labai
started
reikalinga
last
tokioms
week, and I
mažoms
believe
šalims
that
kaip
the
Lietuva.
initiative is quite important for such small countries as Lithuania, and the solution regarding dual citizenship
reikalauja referendumo
is
ir
not
kad tas referendumas pavyktų ir būtų sėkmingas, reikės atrasti daug kūrybingų sprendinių.
unrealistic.
Ko gero
However,
neužteks
we
vien
will
tik
have
apjungti
to
šį referendumą, tiksliau jo datą su
include
prezidento rinkimais, kada tradiciškai
number
dalyvauja
of,
daugiausiai rinkėjų.
stakeholders in this discussion, as well as find ways to have our nationals engaged in finding solutions to this problem, because about 800,000 of our people residing abroad would probably express their interest to have dual citizenship. Lithuania is a small country, and if we want to be as successful as, let's say, Israel or Ireland, we just must to have clear information channels as how to reach our citizens and communicate to them how important they are to Lithuania. As for important aspects related to labor market, a lot of effort is being made in the coalition to have the important provisions of the labor code in the near future, and also return of our diaspora representatives to Lithuania is also one of the key objectives that we have. A lot will depend on the decisions of our parliament and on our government. Probably I will stop here now, and if you have any questions or comments, I will be glad to respond to them. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank to all the speakers that have delivered their presentations, to all the participants who find this topic important to Lithuania, and I am very optimistic in saying that this is not our last meeting, because, as you know, the negotiations will take a long time, and there will be other questions and discussions in the future. Now, I thank you all once again, and